Patriots. Hold the line because history is unfolding before our very eyes. While most Americans were asleep, battle lines were being drawn on Capitol Hill. And no, this wasn't just another legislative maneuver. This was a high-stakes political showdown for the future of our republic. This is about grit. This is about resolve. And this is about one of the most aggressive moves we've seen in years, pushed by Speaker Mike Johnson, backed by President Trump, and fought for by true conservative warriors willing to defy the swamp to get it done. Today, we're diving deep into the late-night chaos, the backdoor deals, and the intense pressure campaign that turned nitrogen monoxide votes into YES. Because make no mistake, this is how freedom survives, by standing tall in the darkest hour.
Well, good morning, guys. We are probably about an hour, maybe an hour and a half away from actually starting the roll call vote. The final step in approving the big, beautiful bill and getting it to the president's desk. What the House of Representatives has decided to do is sync up with the bill that the Senate passed just a couple of days ago. This is not, any changes in this bill. This is the Senate bill. And because it's not the original House bill that was approved in late May, what they had to do is get a lot of people on board. There was a point when they started a procedural vote, a test vote last night about 9:30, where they had as many as 5 Republican noes on the board, and depending on where they stood in the roll call vote, about 8 to 9 who were just not willing to cast their ballots. There were some pretty intense moments there. As I always say, it's about the math. They can only lose 3 votes and still pass the bill. So they needed to change that, get all the people who were not voting, withholding their votes, on board, and then get the others who were no's to vote as well. And so at the end of the day, they were able to lug these guys across the finish line. You had, Thomas Massie at one point. He's going to vote no against the bill. However, he voted yes on the procedural vote, then switched his vote to no, then came back to yes. You had Scott Perry, a Republican from Pennsylvania, who wasn't even here. He was in Pennsylvania. They were waiting for him to drive back in this coalition of mostly these conservatives and Freedom Caucus members. They were going to vote as a bloc. They talked to President Trump around 1 o'clock in the morning. And then they, relented and got these side agreements that they wanted to go ahead and vote on the bill about 3:30 in the morning. At the end of the day, the only Republican who voted against actually starting debate on the bill, that was Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican from Pennsylvania. So they can only lose 3 on the final vote. But once you get past that test vote, it's all but a fait accompli to get this done. The reason the timing is a little bit up in the air here is what they do is they afford the top leaders in the House a courtesy. They can speak for what they call a magic minute. They are yielded to for a minute, but in reality, they take more than that. And Hakeem Jeffries, he started maybe about 5 or 6 minutes before the top of the hour, and we were told by his office yesterday that he would probably go for about an hour, so that would get us probably close to 6 o'clock Eastern time. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, will be the final person to vote to speak here. We don't think that he will speak nearly as long, and then they will go to a final vote. And keep in mind, because it's such a narrow turning radius, that margin in the House of Representatives for Republicans is so tight, they're probably only going to win this by a vote or two. The vote, if this is our guide, if history is our guide here, the vote on the procedural vote was 219 to 213. It'll be a little bit different, presuming Fitzpatrick votes no, and then Thomas Massie maybe joins him. But all Democrats were here. They had no absences, all 216 Democrats, and so they will, vote no, and then the Republicans will pick up, the balance. It'll be a tight vote when they go to it, but we're pretty assured that that's going to get done. And they meet the goal of President Trump of getting the bill passed before the 4th of July holiday. Guys, back to you.
Okay, so Chad, it took a really long time for the rule vote, that procedural vote, to pass. That happened at around 3:30. And there were 5 no's initially: Thomas Massie, Keith Self, Brian Fitzpatrick, Andrew Clyde, and Victoria Spartz. Do you know what the guarantees that were made that turned some of those no's into yeses?
Yeah, they've been looking for, guarantees of other pieces of legislation that they could not fit into this bill, things that the House of Representatives had approved that they would get another chance to do their bills, also a guarantee of executive orders from the president. One of the biggest differences between the House bill and the Senate bill was the fact that in the original House bill, they were able to bar Medicaid benefits from going to illegal immigrants. Well, because the Senate has these special budget rules to avoid a filibuster, there was no way they could ever get this through under the regular order in the Senate, so they had to use this special process to bypass a filibuster. That was ruled out by the Senate parliamentarians. So a lot of conservatives did not like that premise there. I also talked to Eric Burleson, a Republican from Missouri, yesterday, who was a no and said he wanted to get to yes, but said he was very concerned about some of the deficit issues. And so, those concerns were laid. But it was pretty clear that this block of people were there, and they were waiting for Scott Perry to come back from Pennsylvania so they all could go in and vote. At one point, though, things were a little bit intense because, by calling this vote last night, Mike Johnson did not necessarily have the votes nailed down. He seemed to think and exuded confidence throughout the day that they would get there. But what that did is it kind of flushed out and made people take a position. You don't really know where they stand until they cast their ballots. And so very quickly, people were either up on the board as no's or they had not voted. And we understood the universe of those members who were kind of out there. And then, was there pressure from the president, pressure from some of their colleagues, certainly pressure from their constituents, those who are aligned with President Trump. They did not want to be, nor did the Republican leadership want them to be the persons who stood in the way of passing the big, beautiful bill.
Chad, when you look at the tight margin in the House, just overall, the Republicans to Democrat ratio, and then you look at what's happened in the last few cycles. I mean, the Freedom Caucus there all but torpedoed Kevin McCarthy as a speaker. What does it say about Johnson as Speaker of the House if they get this passed, this quickly after the Senate passed it?
Well, he has really threaded a needle repeatedly on these big bills. The frameworks, which they did, a couple of those leading up to this, some other things, it's been very close. He doesn't have a big margin of error, so the level of difficulty is harder. I wrote a blog that's up on our website just a couple of weeks ago talking about Mike Johnson, and I said, the calling card of former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was always being able on her side, very different perspective, but to move legislation that was important to her and the Democrats through with tight majority. She always knew where the votes were. Mike Johnson has kind of mirrored that, frankly, and some people have argued he hasn't gotten the same credit. Now, that said, the best whip in Congress, and I've said this a couple of times the past few days, is probably President Trump. It certainly helps to have him there, and they are more unified behind President Trump, and that certainly helps out Mike Johnson.
Sure.
Okay, so the cliff notes are that the rule vote happened. It passed around 3:30. Negotiations are underway right now. Final vote expected in about an hour, and House Speaker Mike Johnson is pretty confident that he has the vote. So we're teeing up for a historic day here, Chad, and we thank you so much for
and no more negotiations. It's set. No more negotiations.
Everybody needs some sleep, a shower, and a meal after this. All right, Chad Pergam live for us on the House floor. Chad, thank you.
Thanks, Chad.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
Let's go now to Chad
Tight
Pergam
vote
from
margin.
Capitol Hill.
Now,
He's got
folks, let me
breaking
tell
details
you,
on
when they
this
say
big,
every
beautiful
vote counts, this is what they mean.
Well, good morning,
With only
guys.
3
We are
Republican
probably
votes allowed
about
to
an
break
hour,
ranks,
maybe an hour
this
and
was
a
a
half away
razor's
from
edge
actually
moment.
starting the roll call
One
vote.
wrong
The
move,
final step
and
in
the
approving
entire
big,
deal
beautiful
would
bill
have
and getting it to the
collapsed.
president's desk. What
That's
the House
how
of
high the
Representatives
stakes were.
has decided to
Late
do
night
is sync up
negotiations,
with the bill
while
that
the left
Senate
was
passed
busy
just a
tweeting
couple
from
of
their
days ago.
basements.
This is not,
Real patriots were grinding
any
through the
changes in this
night.
bill. This is the Senate
3:30
bill.
a.m.
And
That's when the
because it's not
procedural vote
original
finally
House bill
broke
that was
through.
approved in late
That's
May, what they had to
dedication.
do is get a
That's
lot of
the
people
fight
on
we've been
board. There
asking
was a
for.
point when they started a
Republican
procedural
holdouts
vote, a
flip
test
under
vote
pressure.
last night
Yes,
about
some
9:30,
Republicans
where
wavered.
they had as many
Thomas
as
Massie
5
flipped more
Republican no's
times
on
than
the
a
board,
pancake
and,
on Sunday
depending
morning.
on where they
But in
stood
the
the roll
end,
call vote,
when
about
it
8 to
counted,
9
most of them
were just
stood
not
with
willing
us.
to cast their
And we'll
ballots.
remember who held
There
the
were some
line
pretty
and
intense moments there.
who
As
didn't.
I always say, it's about
Freedom
the math. They
Caucus
can only
and
lose
Trump's 1
3
a.m.
votes
call.
and still pass
Let me
the
paint
bill.
the
So
picture.
they needed to change
Freedom
that, get all
Caucus
the people
conservatives
who
on the
were,
phone with Trump at
not
1 a.m.
voting, withholding
That's
their
not
votes
just
on
commitment.
board, and then
That's
get the others who were
leadership.
no's,
They
to
didn't
vote as
roll
well.
over,
And so
they
at the end of the day,
negotiated
they were
hard.
able to lug these
And with
guys
Trump
across
backing
the finish
them,
line.
they pushed this
You
bill
had,
forward with steel
Thomas
in their
Massie.
spine.
At one point,
Side
he's gonna vote
deals
no
and
against the
executive
bill.
orders,
However,
this
he
wasn't
voted
some blank
yes on the
check
procedural vote,
giveaway.
then switched his
These
vote to
votes
no,
came with
then
real
came back to
promises
yes.
future.
You had
Legislation,
Scott
executive
Perry, a
orders,
Republican
and a
from
guarantee
Pennsylvania, who
that
wasn't
conservative
even here. He
priorities
was in
wouldn't be
Pennsylvania.
left behind.
They were waiting for
That's
him
the
to
art
drive
of the
back
deal,
this
baby.
coalition.
Immigration
Mostly
and
these
budget
conservatives
battles.
and
Here's
Freedom
where
Caucus
things get
members,
heated.
they were
Illegal
going to vote
immigrants
as a
and
bloc. They talked to
deficit
President
bloat.
Trump around 1
The
o'clock
House
in the
tried
morning.
to block
And then
Medicaid
they,
benefits for
relented
illegals,
and
but
got
the
these
Senate
side
rules
agreements that
watered
they wanted
it
to
down.
go ahead and vote on the
Conservatives
bill about
didn't like
3:30
that
in the
one
morning.
bit,
At the end
but
of
they
the day,
made
the
their
only
voices
Republican
heard,
who
loud
voted
and clear.
against
Mike
actually
Johnson,
starting debate on the bill,
conservative
that was
fighter,
Brian
say what you want.
Fitzpatrick, a
But
Republican
Mike Johnson just
from
proved he's
Pennsylvania.
not playing
So
kiddie
they can only
politics.
lose 3 on the final
He
vote.
did
But
what
once you get past
Pelosi
that
used
test
to do,
vote, it's
count the
all but a
votes,
fait
lock the
accompli
chamber,
to get this
and
done.
bring it home.
The reason
Only
the
this
timing
time,
is a little bit
it's
up
for
in the air
America
here
first,
is what
not
they do
radical
is they
nonsense.
afford the top
Democrats united
leaders
against
in the
America
House
first.
a
All
courtesy. They can speak
216
for what they call a
Democrats
magic
showed up,
minute.
not to
They are
support
yielded
America,
to
but
for
to
a
oppose
minute,
every
but
single
in reality
line of
they
this
take
bill.
more than that. And Hakeem
Every
Jeffries, he
single
started maybe
one.
about 5 or 6
That
minutes
tells you
before the top
everything
of
you
the
need
hour.
to know about
And we
their
were told by his
priorities.
office yesterday
Folks,
that he would
Trump's
probably go
pressure
for about
was
an
a
hour.
game
So that would
changer.
get us probably
Let's be
close
clear,
to 6
this was
o'clock
Trump's
Eastern
win.
time. Mike
His
Johnson, the
influence
Speaker of the
flipped
House, will be the
votes.
final
His power
person
kept
to
the
vote
party
to
focused.
speak here. We don't
The
think
MAGA
that he will
movement
speak
is
nearly as
alive
long,
and stronger
and then
than
they will
ever,
go to a
and
final
this bill
vote.
is proof.
And keep in mind,
Victory
because
before
it's such
July
a narrow
4th,
turning radius,
symbolic
that
and
margin in the
powerful.
House of
Getting this
Representatives
passed
for
before
Republicans is
Independence
so
Day,
tight, they're probably
that
only
wasn't
going to win this by
just timing, it
a
was
vote or two.
symbolic.
The vote,
A
if this
reminder
is
that
our
we're
guide,
still
if
in
history
this
is our guide
fight
here,
to
the vote on
preserve
the
our
procedural
freedoms,
vote was
restore our
219 to
values,
213.
and
It'll be a
take
little
this
bit
country
different,
back.
presuming
Patriots,
Fitzpatrick
what we
votes
witnessed was nothing
no,
short
and
of
then
political
Thomas Massie
warfare,
maybe
and we
joins
came
them.
out on
But
top.
all
But this
Democrats
isn't the
were here.
end.
They had no
The left
absences,
is already
all
scheming,
216
already spinning their
Democrats,
lies,
and, so
and they're
they
hoping
will,
you're too tired
vote,
to notice.
vote no, and
But
then
we're wide
Republicans will
awake.
pick up,
We're ready.
the
If you
balance. It'll be a
support
tight
President
vote
Trump,
when they
if
go
you
to it,
believe
but
in
we're
Speaker
pretty
Johnson's
assured that
courage,
that's going
and
to
if
get
you're
done.
tired
And
of weak
they meet the
need
goal
RN
of
news
President Trump
and
of
radical
getting the bill
leftists
passed
destroying
before
our country,
the 4th
then this
of
is your
July
moment.
holiday.
Like
Don,
this
thank you.
video, share
Okay,
it
so
with your
Chad, it
fellow
took
patriots.
a really long time
Subscribe for more
for
real
the rule
news,
vote, that
and ring
procedural
that bell
vote to
so
pass
big
that
tech
happened
can't silence
at
our
around
truth.
3:30.
We're
And there
not
were
backing
5
down.
no's
We're
initially.
taking
Thomas
America
Massie,
back.
Keith Self,
One
Brian
bill, one
Fitzpatrick,
vote, one
Andrew
victory at
Clyde,
a
and Victoria
time.
Sparks. Do you know what the
America first.
guarantees
#MAGA,
that were made that
hashtag
turned
big
some of those
beautiful.
no's into
Bill,
yeses?
hashtag Patriot.
Yeah,
News,
they've been looking
hashtag
for
Mike Johnson,
guarantees of
hashtag
other
Trump,
pieces of
42-4,
legislation that they could not
hashtag
fit
drain
into
the
this
swamp,
bill, things that
hashtag
the House
Freedom
of Representatives
Caucus,
had
hashtag
approved that they would get
conservative
another
victory,
chance
hashtag
to
4th of
do
July
their
freedom.
bills. Also a guarantee